Good evening, everyone. Had some sugar to a little while earlier, so I'm probably going to be a little bit more lively today than usual, but hopefully not too much. I wanted to talk today about politics because the political season is really getting underway. And obviously on our blog here, as we were discussing the different virtues and taking time to really look at the virtues through different perspectives. That's why we're trying to look at them through different disciplines and also devoting numerous posts to them so we can gain sort of the pros and cons of every virtue. I think in one of the earlier posts we saw, I think Nietzsche said that every virtue can lead to a stupidity, and every stupidity can be some sort of virtue. And there seems to be a lot of truth in that. That any virtue taken sort of pursued exclusively without in conjunction with others causes problems. And as he also said, any sort of stupidity in some form can be a virtue. Any sort of not getting involved in things that are bad for you because of stupidity or just not knowing things that or being aware of the limitations of knowledge would be another sense in which stupidity could be a virtue. But moving beyond that, I think the point here for our discussion is that politics or political involvement shouldn't just be assumed to be a good thing. We shouldn't always assume that it's always good to be political, but we have to consider why it is or in what circumstances. And of course, one of the biggest things with being political is that by being political, you sort of give up some of yourself. You hear this in a lot of candidates as they debate whether to pursue office or not. And one thing that they constantly think about is what am I going to have to give up personally? What am I going to have to sacrifice of my reputation or my privacy? So there is definitely, in political involvement, a somewhat of a sacrifice of the self. And of course, there's degrees here. Someone that runs for office is going to be sacrificing himself much more than someone that's following the campaign. But even to the extent that someone is following the campaign closely, you are obviously not doing other things. You're not, doing other things that would be maybe more relevant to your own experience of the world. So there's always a trade-off in these things. So I guess one thing I wanted to think about today is consider a view that says you shouldn't really care that much about politics. And of course, we've I think already outlined or will outline views that say you should care very much about politics. But today we're going to look at a view that says you shouldn't care very much about politics. Politics is something that is sort of a grand, ideal. It doesn't really affect your day-to-day life, and what you should focus on is your day-to-day life. That alone is what gives your life meaning. And I want to do that through considering the thought of a thinker, Isaiah Berlin, who one of his central ideas was the thought that politics gets perverted typically when people use this abstract ideal and pursue it to the exclusion of the needs of ordinary people. And that's when politics really becomes harmful. Whether we see that in the communist experience earlier in the 1900s or even before that, the pursuit of some political ideal or general ideal when it sacrifices individual human lives and the reality of individual lives, that's what's dangerous. And I think we get that in Berlin's thought that he does stress, as we'll start to see in some of these passages, that he does stress the importance of man's individual life, man's day-to-day, moment-to-moment existence, man's you could even say trivial or basic needs of love and play and some of the things we've been talking about. Those are the things that are important, not these grand ideals that politics sort of presses forward to us. Let's look at some passages here. This is from Berlin's essay, The Hedgehog, The Hedgehog and the Fox. And on page 457 on 450 of my edition, Berlin writes that he's talking about, what is it that politics or people that pursue grand ideals in politics, what are they really doing? And he says often what turns out is that they are, he describes them as hollow men, half self-deluded, half aware of being fraudulent, talking, writing desperately and aimlessly in order to keep up appearances and avoid the bleak truths. Side by side with all this elaborate machinery for concealing the spectacle of human impotence and irrelevance and blindness lies the real world, the stream of life which men understand, the attending to the ordinary details of daily existence. So in this passage, he starts to contrast again the ordinary stream of life that men understand, the moment-to-moment existence, with this sort of machinery that sort of has these false truths, these grand ideals that are kept up by this sort of machinery, but that doesn't take seriously the notion that human affairs can't really be affected that much by politics. And then again here in the next page, we get another description of this dichotomy. He says, let's start the whole sentence. Utterly unlike her as he is in almost every other respect, Tolstoy is perhaps the first to propound the celebrated accusation which Virginia Woolf half a century later leveled against the public prophets of her own generation, blind materialists who did not begin to understand what it is that life truly consists of. Here's sort of the key passage. What it is that life truly consists of, who mistook its outer accidents, the unimportant aspects which lie outside the individual soul, the so-called social, economic, political realities, for that which alone is genuine, the individual experience, the specific relation of individuals to one another, the colors, smells, tastes, sounds and movements, the jealousies, loves, hatreds, passions, the rare flashes of insight, the transforming moments, the ordinary day-to-day succession of private data which constitute all there is, which are reality. So again, another sort of celebration of the existence of a sensual world, of a world that has many colors, smells, tastes, and sounds. That's animated, really, that's getting pushed forward by passions and loves and hatreds, and sort of deminimization of the outer accidents of life, the unimportant aspects, so-called social, economic, and political realities. Again, the abstraction versus the detail of the individual life, which is always viewed as more important and more rich as well. In another essay, Herzen in his memoirs, Berlin comes to this point again, and he says, in describing this guy, Herzen's thought, he says, together with this skepticism about the meaning and value of abstract ideals as such, in contrast with the concrete, short-term, immediate goals of identifiable living individuals, specific freedoms, reward for the day's work. Again, expressing the same thought there. And he certainly, I think you could say, shared that skepticism about the meaning and value of abstract ideals versus the concrete needs of particular persons. If we look at, if we go back to the essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox, we sort of get more of an explanation of why Berlin sort of sees politics in some sense in this way, or at least the politics driven by ideals, grand ideals. And he says basically that the flow of life is such that these people that sort of blow up these grand ideals are sort of ones that are, filled with their sense of their own self-importance, and they don't understand that they don't have the humility to recognize their own unimportance and irrelevance. I think that's certainly a critique that's often made of politicians, that they're not humble enough, that they're arrogant. And I think Berlin here is saying, indeed, they don't realize how little that they're really affecting things. They're in Washington, sort of filled with self-importance, but what they really can affect is quite small. And I think in another passage we get more of a flavor for why Berlin thinks that. And it's sort of a view that the world. I think we saw this in some of the other posts. The world is sort of going about doing its thing. I think we saw this in one of the posts on I think we quoted Alexander Nehamas on something similar that gives his view of the tragic view of life, that the world is going about and it's doing whatever it's going to do, and human beings are here on this world. We're trying to do things to affect the world in some way, but the world is spinning. It's just doing its own thing, and so the effort to do that, of course we have to act in the world, but we have to also understand that the world is spinning, and we may not be able to change things. And I think the proper sense of humility comes from that. And so here Berlin is sort of expressing some very similar view here. He says, let's see here. He says that the wise man or that the great man is wiser, but he is not more knowledgeable. And his wisdom comes in that he has a more profound vision. He says, what's this profound vision? They see something the others fail to see. They see the way the world goes, what goes with what, and what never will be brought together. They see what can be and what cannot, how men live and to what ends, what they do and suffer, and how and why they act and should act, thus and not otherwise. And then he says again here, let's see. He says that, again, wisdom comes in, not in scientific knowledge, but a special sensitiveness to the contours of the circumstances in which we happen to be placed. There's a capacity for living without falling foul of some permanent condition or factor which cannot be either altered or even fully described or calculated. An ability to be guided by rules of thumb. So again, the sense that the wise man, has a sense that there's really limits to what he can do in the world. There's limits to there's a certain way that the world goes, and there's a certain sense of what's possible and what's not possible. How people are really motivated, and he's humble enough to have a keen appreciation of that, as opposed to someone that's sort of a self-important person that doesn't have that sense. Let's see here on 491 we get again another sort of description of this. He says we are part of a larger scheme of things that we are part of a larger scheme of things than we can understand. We cannot describe it in the way in which external objects or the characters of other people can be described, by isolating them somewhat from the historical flow in which they have their being. Anyone that sort of resists this will protest and suffer in vain and make sorry fools of themselves, cites Napoleon. This sense of the circumambient stream, defiance of whose nature through stupidity or overweening egotism will make our acts and thoughts self-defeating, is the vision of the unity of experience, the sense of history, the true knowledge of reality. So again, limitations on what we can do, limitations of what politics, the possibility of politics. So I guess the thought would be here. I guess I'm going to sort of skip through some more of these similar thoughts with what he's saying. Let's just turn to this passage too. Now, this is another essay, the apotheosis of the romantic will. So not only does sort of Berlin have this view against grand political ideals in opposition to the primacy, as compared to the importance of the individual and his experience, but also he has a sense in which sort of there's no coherent, unified sense in which all goals can be harmonized. That any politics cannot do that. It cannot bring about a social structure that sort of is totally harmonious, totally peaceful, in which men are no longer fighting or hostile to one another. Everyone is universally in harmonious cooperation. Um, he thinks that's just not possible because the goals and ends of man are just too different. There's too many people pursuing different things at once. It doesn't even make sense to think that there could be some political state where all of those could be harmonized. So that's sort of another attack, I guess, he has on politics in that sense. So, having said all that, I guess we could sort of take light of it now and think, okay, so if there's all these things that politics can't do, and all these great things about the individual and his importance of his life, his day-to-day existence, then what is politics good for at all? And of course, as we said, Berlin even says at the beginning of one of his essays, that distinctions, he says, all oversimplifications, any dichotomy that's really an oversimplification, if pressed too far, becomes artificial, scholastic, and ultimately absurd. So obviously, it would be absurd to say there would be no situation in which the individual that cares very deeply about his personal life should ever engage in politics. And I think Berlin obviously has that same view when he argues that these sort of distinctions, any distinction, dichotomy, that you just continue to just go with it at some point is just silly. Of course, no one would say that under all circumstances you should be apolitical. And so I think if he's saying that, then he's probably not correct. But I don't think he's saying that. Certainly not. And I don't think that would make sense. I think there are obviously situations where you should be interested in politics and pursue it. But I guess the question would always be to what degree, for what goals, for what pursuits. But it shouldn't be sort of an automatic assumption that you should always be interested in politics. Many political disputes are just silly. Many laws that are passed do very little to affect anything. I don't think it's a great use of your time to spend, especially the amount of time that gets devoted to politics, slaving over the details of every debate and every discussion about politics. Seems to be you have to choose wisely, and in my sense, I would rather spend more time on myself. Now, of course, someone might say, well, that's you're prizing yourself more, and so I think that might be a fair criticism that you've gone too far in terms of caring about your own individual existence, become a detached person. But I think in another sense, again, even that view has its limits. Turning again to Berlin, it says on 569 of the Apotheosis of the Romantic Will that he's talking about how is it that people are actually made conscious of who they are? How is it that they become who they are? And in a very interesting passage, I want to quote this. A man is made conscious of being what he is, of himself, as against others or the external world, not by thought or contemplation. Since the purer this is, the more a man's thought is in its object, the less conscious of itself it will be as a subject. Self-awareness springs from encountering resistance. It is the impact on me of what is external to me, and the effort to resist it that makes me know that I am what I am, aware of my aims, my nature, my essence, as opposed to what is not mine. And since I am not alone in the world, but connected by myriad strands, as Burke taught us, it is the impact that makes me understand what my culture, my nation, my language, my historical tradition, my true home have been and are. So in that sense, I think if we take that passage seriously, that self-creation and self-development can't just happen through thought, pure thought, because then you're just wrapped up in the thought. But it has to come about through some sort of resistance or encounter with something in the world, and that could be politics. And so to the extent that you're engaging in political discourse or ideas, you sort of bring to that discourse and get out of the discourse something more about yourself. You learn more about your ideas, and your ideas inform who you are. And I guess the key point of the passage was that resistance, that engagement with an idea, and defining yourself vis-a-vis the idea practically and in the world, in a political engagement of some sort. That is going to define who you are. Or it doesn't have to be, you don't have to run for office, but a discussion with someone about a political matter, or getting involved in some political action committee or something like that. In those ways, you can sort of test your ideas and see what you really believe against others that have different ideas, and that's going to help you define yourself. So I guess we've sort of laid out one approach to this issue. Again, going back to the question that we started with, does it make sense? Where should we prioritize ourselves? Should it be at the self level and focusing on our daily existence, or should it be at the level of politics and political engagement? And I think Berlin's presented some very strong reasons for why the political involvement should be secondary, and perhaps far secondary to the details of our lives. That seems to be where Berlin says the excitement and the interest and the complexity and the fascination of life. It's all there, and you're the only one that is aware of it. No one else can taste that or know it, and it's uniquely yours. So I think he's definitely laid out an idea as to the virtue of political disinvolvement, I would say, and one that may make people less guilty when they're not involved in politics. And so with that, we will continue with some other topic tomorrow. Good night.